On the line with us is Lori Wallach, the Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Tradewatch.org is the website, or citizen.org/trade. And there you can tweet her at Wallach, W-A-L-L-A-C-H, Lori, L-O-R-I. And Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
I always enjoy our conversations. I always learn so much, and you are such a clear, articulate, and informed voice on this issue of trade. And I so honor the fact that you don't turn it into partisan crap, for lack of a better word. And I hope I don't offend anybody, you or anybody else with that word. But for example, you and I can agree that some of what Trump is doing, at least in the way it's being presented, we shouldn't have a trade deficit with China, for example, or Europe, is actually he's right about this stuff. He's just doing it wrong. So, A, feel free to react to that. And B, the G7 just happened. Trump's racism and misogyny are fine, but trade is intolerable. I don't get this.
Well, it's like, let me pull over the Pepto-Bismol on the barf bucket, because your situation is, what you've just described, the situation is exactly spot on. So a lot of the critique that Trump has appropriated has been the analysis of unions and progressive activist groups. Yeah, he basically stole Democrats in Congress.
He stole one of Bernie's biggest issues.
And it's been, for decades, it's been the lefty Democrats and the unions, and for that matter, small business Republicans, and small-town businesses. It hasn't just been a left-right issue, but it's been people who are not sort of walking, talking, tweeting billionaires who have been largely the critics. But Trump has, to be fair, had a consistent opposition to NAFTA, to WTO, to the China trade regime. And before there was NAFTA, he was against NAFTA. So while that is consistent for him, a lot of the critique he's now taking as far as what policy changes have to happen are those that have been articulated mainly by folks from the left, but also from some small businesses and from Main Street Republicans. And now you've got those policy demands, as you've said, many of which are the right thing, being conflated with the worst kind of racism, anti-immigrant sentiment, really personal hostilities, bad behavior, and manners that result actually at this point in this dangerous situation where the progressives, the people running small businesses, the independent farmers out there who have long been the greatest, strongest critics because they've lived the damage, Tom, of deals like NAFTA and WTO, they're now scratching their heads saying, good Lord, if that crazy guy is talking about it that way, do I actually still agree? It's actually a hazard. Because, folks, we're right. These agreements are a loser. These agreements have done real damage. We really have lost almost 1 million jobs to NAFTA, certified by the U.S. government. We do have a trade deficit with Canada and with Mexico and with NAFTA combined. But right now, the whole thing is getting blurred by the fact that there's a dynamic of who the spokesperson is and what else he's rolling into, what are legitimate critiques and, frankly, legitimate demands.
Well, and my biggest concern is he's doing it on an ad hoc basis, throwing around, oh, well, I'll give you an exemption, especially if you fund my hotel, but I'm not going to give you an exemption because you haven't given me anything this week or stroked my ego enough. And I see no large strategy. I see the rant, and, with which, like I said, I to a large extent agree. But although, like you correctly point out, increasingly that rant is being based in, oh, by the way, did you notice that those countries that are eating our lunch on trade are filled with people who don't look like white Europeans? And, so it's like he's conflating racism with this stuff. But it seems to me that even if he does it right, he does it wrong because he doesn't do it well.
Well, here's the thing that's so disappointing. There is actually some basic strategy here. There's one guy who gets the whole lay of the land, and that's the U.S. Trade Representative.
Robert Lighthizer.
Robert Lighthizer, the guy that progressive Senator Sherrod Brown calls the best cabinet minister in the Trump administration. I would say the only good one to add to Sherrod. But this guy actually has a vision developed over decades of what needs to happen. So if he and you, Tom, sat down, you guys, I suspect, would agree on 80% of the agenda, including specifically, he has sort of 4 principal things that have to change with the U.S.-China trade relationship in order to get it back in balance and make it more sustainable. And he has the visions of the tools you use. The tariffs are just tools to try and make some of those changes. Just like at the end of this month, there are going to be new investment restrictions on Chinese investment in the United States. That's to basically take away another of the ways in which China has been putting a thumb on the scale in trade competition, which is to buy up their competitors in the U.S., assume them, and stop the competition. So the agenda that is there is a plan underneath it, is lost in the Trumpian chaos of, as you pointed out, Trump one day following that plan, the next day deciding it's in the interest of the Trump Organization's business interest to do something else, then maybe a week later swinging back the other way. There is no story that's coming through.
Yeah.
And to the extent the president keeps changing directions erratically, the strategy and plan, which I actually think are the right one that the top trade guy has, and the use of some of these tools, these tactics. I mean, tariffs should be a tactic. They are a tool. But the way the president is basically creating chaos on message and content, it's very hard to follow the plan.
Yeah. What is the, first of all, I'd like to get your thoughts on this whole ZTE deal and Huawei, if I'm pronouncing that right. These 2 Chinese phone manufacturers that the DoD, the Department of Defense, determined were basically backdoor spy devices being sold in the United States, and therefore they pulled them off all the military bases. And then, we blocked them, and then the Trump administration said, no, you can't, you can't buy parts from the United States, and we're not going to, and you can't sell phones in the United States. And then suddenly the Chinese government funds the Trump Hotel in Indonesia, which is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, to the tune of $1 billion, 2 $500 million loans. And Ivanka gets 14 trademarks that are going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to her over the next decade. And suddenly Donald Trump is just fine with ZTE. Am I characterizing that accurately?
You are, only it's worse. ZTE was actually also subject to over $1 billion in criminal fines because in addition to the phones being listening devices and unsafe for domestic security, they were being sanctioned under the Trading with the Enemy Act sanctions for selling phones and trading technology with Iran and North Korea. They also had $1 billion in criminal sanctions, which when they were going to be shut down and not allowed to buy parts from the U.S., it was an intentional shut these bad players down. And the Trump administration intervened to throw them a lifeline. Folks may have seen that head-spinning tweet from President Trump about we have to save ZTE, too many jobs lost in China.
Yeah, 60,000 jobs in China. We're going to compromise the security of the United States in order to save 60,000 jobs in China so that Trump's hotel can get $1 billion and his daughter can get $200 million. That's what it looks like to me.
So right at that same period, so that whole stunt happened about a week after they announced these major Chinese trade cheating enforcement actions that are done under a law called Section 301 of the Trade Act. And this was a whole very well-researched, thought-out plan to go after another piece of China's ways in which they are cheating on trade, which is technology theft, either literally cyber espionage or forced technology transfer. You can't run your business here unless you get a Chinese partner and hand over all your patents. So this was an investigation that figured out particular products and sectors, all part of the China 2025 plan to dominate the industries of the future, where there was this forced technology transfer or theft. And the point was either knock it off or you're going to face trade sanctions. And these are these trade sanctions on China that will go into effect this Friday, the 15th of June. So that whole plan is rolling out, and they're starting to get ready to also talk about what the investment restrictions are, and that's to restrict the Chinese government from government-controlled entities from buying up U.S. companies and getting the patents and technology that way. And all of a sudden, a week later, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin goes to China and says, we're trying to actually instead make a deal to get the Chinese to buy a little bit more soybean exports and, some liquid natural gas.
Right. Suddenly the farmers in Iowa are upset with us, and there's primaries coming.
Well, no, but even more so, it's like that's a one-time or two-year fix as compared to fixing the structure of a competitive system intended to basically have China dominate the market and wipe out the U.S. role.
So Lori, we just have 30 seconds before we're going to hit a hard break. What do we do?
Well, so they flip-flop back again. The thing that folks need to do is stay focused on the critique and the actual fix, and actually in this instance to get with your members of Congress. Ultimately, Congress has authority over trade. So the more pressure that's coming from Congress on the administration, because, Tom, we talked about this last time, but to go back to it, they actually are doing the right thing in NAFTA renegotiations. They're actually heading to a NAFTA renegotiation that will remove NAFTA's outsourcing incentives and add labor and environmental standards. So we need to basically get Congress to keep the administration, keep their eyes on the ball, replace NAFTA the right way, stay on track on China, and mainly we all just need to keep on top of it, talking about it, and pushing for what we want.
Amen. And you can go to tradewatch.org and get the whole story there. Lori Wallach, the Executive Director of the Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Lori, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It is always great talking with you. You are just one of the absolute smartest and finest people I know. Lori Wallach with tradewatch.org. We'll be back.